welcome to meeting number 57 of the Standing Committee on Procedure and House Affairs.
Standing Order 1064 at the request of 5 members to discuss the committee's ongoing study on foreign election interference. Just while I have the floor, I have with me 2 guests. So we have Yasmin and we have Kushi with us, who are 2 women in the House from the University of Toronto. And we have 2 others. We'll get your names shouted out too. Mila and Emily are also joining Mrs. Blaney. And we have Alexis joining Miss O'Connell, who also happens to have a birthday today. So this is a very exciting day. And so just a reminder that unless we can have good decorum, all comments should be addressed to the chair. The clerk and I will maintain consolidated speaking lists of members wishing to speak. Mr. Cooper.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I will move a motion at this time. We will distribute copies to members in both official languages. And so I will read into the record now.
So I'm just going to do the same thing. You have the floor. I will pass the floor right back to you. I'm just going to ensure it's distributed so that all members have it. The clerk has signaled that she's received it. We will just send it to everyone. So just, it's been sent. And the minute I can get some heads nodding to demonstrate that everyone has it, I will return the floor to Mr. Cooper. And if we can just have a gallery view in front of me, that would be greatly appreciated. And a gallery view in front of Monsieur Fergus. I understand everyone has received the motion in both official languages. Mr. Cooper, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The motion is as follows. That the committee, in relation to its study of foreign election interference, invite Katie Telford, Chief of Staff to the Prime Minister, to appear alone for 3 hours during the week of March 13th, 2023, provided that she be sworn or affirmed. Madam Chair, I'm going to make some fairly brief remarks in support of the motion. Under this Prime Minister's watch, Beijing interfered in 2 elections, the 2019 election and the 2021 election. The Prime Minister has been briefed, according to his National Security Advisor, repeatedly about Beijing's interference. And yet, notwithstanding serious interference in Canadian democracy, we have seen no action taken by this Prime Minister. No charges have been laid. No investigations have been undertaken, although there are some finally that appear to be underway, and no diplomats have been expelled. No one has been expelled. And what is the heart of the issue is what the Prime Minister knows, when he first knew about it, and what he did or failed to do about Beijing's election interference. In order to get to the bottom of that, it's imperative that we hear from the Prime Minister's top aide, his Chief of Staff. It's critical to getting to the truth. And unfortunately, at every step of the way, the Prime Minister has obstructed that effort. He has refused to answer basic questions. He has deflected and tried to change the channel. He has ordered Liberal MPs on this committee to block efforts to bring forward key witnesses, to block the production of relevant documents. And yesterday, we saw the Prime Minister at it again with an announcement to do the opposite of what CSIS advised him to do. CSIS has advised the Prime Minister that with respect to election interference, the policy of the government should be grounded in transparency and sunlight, and that such interference should be made known to the public. That's why this committee is so important, but the Prime Minister, of course, obstructed this committee and then yesterday announced that instead of transparency and sunlight, that all of this would be put before a secret committee with secret evidence and secret conclusions, all redacted by the PMO, all part of this Prime Minister's efforts to cover up what he knows and what he failed to do about Beijing's interference. And so it underscores why we need to hear from the Prime Minister's Chief of Staff, Katie Telford. And with that, I hope that the fourth time we've attempted to get Katie Telford to committee, that we'll be successful today in doing so. Canadians deserve answers, and part of getting those answers is to have Katie Telford appear before this committee. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Cooper. Mrs. Blaney.
Oh, well, thank you, Madam Chair, and it's good to be back in the committee. I apologize for missing some of last week, but my constituents in some of my more remote communities really appreciate the time that I had with them, and I just want to thank them for always having time for me. So I do have an amendment, and I'll get that sent to the clerk. But before I talk about the amendment, I just want to say, you know, my history in this committee is I resist heavily having staff come in when they are not the people that make the final decision. Sadly, what we have seen in this country is a continuous leak from CSIS that tells us that there's something serious that we need to be concerned with. And after that many leaks, I am persuaded that we now have to take a step that I am not necessarily initially comfortable with, because it is imperative. People in this country trust their systems. And whenever there is questions to those systems, we need to address those and make sure that those systems are stronger as a result of the work that we do here. Now, the NDP, of course, brought forward the motion that everybody mostly agreed with around the public inquiry. We feel very much that this needs to be done in a setting that is public, where, as my colleague Mr. Cooper talked about earlier, that there would be an element of transparency and sunlight shown on this issue. If we are going to ask Canadians to trust their elections, then we must be held to that account. Hopefully it's seen as a friendly amendment to the motion. Has it been sent out yet?
I'm just going to pause you, Mrs. Blaney. You have the floor, and the floor will be returned to you. I understand we've received it. And have we hit send? We're just going to hit send to all members. And we have 2 members who are replacing regular members, so just to make sure they're on the list. And once it's in front of people's eyes, Mrs. Blaney, I'll return you the floor. So just a couple seconds, please. printed copies are on their way. Can I just confirm that people have received it electronically for now? And we'll keep the meeting moving. Mrs. Blaney.
Thank you so much, Chair. So my amendment is simply this, that we add at the end of the sentence after A, and B, invite the following individuals to appear before the committee as part of the study, provided that they be sworn or affirmed. Jeremy Broadhurst, Azam Ishmael, Hamish Marshall, and Waleed Solomon, National Campaign Directors for the Liberal Party of Canada and the Conservative Party of Canada during the 2019 and 2021 federal election campaigns. To Jenny Byrne, Leader of the Official Opposition Seniors Leadership Advisory, and Tusha Mishard, Chief of Staff to the former Leader of the Official Opposition. Madam Chair, just to say that, I was just recently in Brussels, where we met together with the NATO Parliamentary Association, and there's a lot of concerns about foreign interference. I think it's absolutely imperative that we take this very seriously. We know that 11 members or campaigns, both from the Liberals and Conservatives, have been implicated in some of the information we've heard come out. I think this needs to be an open and transparent process, and that we recognize that all foreign interference matters, and that if we're going to have strong systems that our country can rely on, we definitely need to have this kind of transparency happening here. So I hope that it's seen as a friendly amendment and that we can move forward on this very serious issue that's impacting ourselves here in the House and in Parliament, but also Canadians across the country. Thank you.
Madam Chair, I just want to comment.
Thank you, Mrs. Blaney. As per usual practice, Mr. Fergus is on the list, and then I'll return back to the amendment with Mr. Fergus. But would you like to first comment on the amendment, or would you like to wait till... I will come to you, Mr. Cooper.
Well, I will have comments about the amendment, and I certainly have comments about the main motion, Madam Chair. So what would you recommend?
You want to speak or no?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
All right. Madam Chair.
Coming to you. Okay, sorry. Because she is asking for it as a friendly amendment, not moving an amendment. Mr. Cooper would just like to respond to it. Sorry, Mr. Fergus. I will have Mr. Cooper respond.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I want to thank my colleague, Ms. Blaney, for bringing forward the amendment, and I accept the amendment as a friendly amendment.
Perfect. Mr. Fergus.
First of all, Madam Chair, thank you for giving me this opportunity to speak this morning on this amendment, rather this motion, which has now been amended by Ms. Blaney, which Mr. Cooper, my colleague, seems to find acceptable. If I can just go back in time a bit, because Mr. Cooper said that it was the fourth time that we were debating this motion. And he's quite right. When I go back to the first time that he moved his motion last week during the riding week and the pause that the House had for that, he proposed an amendment. He moved an amendment. There was a section in his amendment that, and I quote it, that said that I have to find the French version here. I just have the English version in front of my eyes here.
After the Prime Minister to appear alone for 2 hours by herself within 2 weeks of the adoption of this motion, provided that she be sworn or affirmed. Madame la Présidente, durant la même...
Madam Chair, during the same meeting, towards the end of the meeting, he should appear for 4 hours. Now, and in fact, he tried to move the same amendment on Thursday last, before we had that everlasting meeting that never seemed to end. Now this is the fourth time. He wants to have the Chief of Staff to the Prime Minister to appear for 3 hours. And I do imagine, Madam Chair, that if we don't adopt this motion and if the debate were to be adjourned or if we reject the motion, he will come back again. Maybe he will speak to 3.5 hours in that motion, or maybe 5 hours. And he will continue to do so, flying in the face of the lengthy traditions of the House of Commons. Madam Speaker, after a motion is debated and is not passed, you no longer have the possibility of reintroducing your motion, a motion which is, in actual fact, almost exactly the same motion. You cannot do that. But I do understand that he changed his motion the first time in a minimal way to make it acceptable, to make it in order. And now he's doing that. He's done that 3 times, and now he's doing it the 4th time. So, Madam Chair, I have to ask myself this. I'm wondering, what game is he playing at? This political, procedural game to waste the time of our committee. At a certain point in time, you have to get down to substantive matters to be able to give substantive answers to Canadians. He has moved his motion today by saying that the Prime Minister and the government, the current government, have taken no initiative to react to the situation, to try to answer to it. I find that very strange. It's very odd. It's almost pitiful because the Prime Minister yesterday gave a press conference where he did, in fact, give his reply and set out the action of the government. What's even more important, Madam Chair, he depoliticized the initiatives. This is really important after 7 hours of debate that we had here. It's important to try to depoliticize the debate because interference, foreign interference, is a matter that requires the very best of our capabilities. It requires us to set aside any type of political interests. It requires us to get to the bottom of the matter. And I find that for a very long time now, for some 17 hours of debate that have already gone by, I think that we're really missing our opportunity here to approach the matter in a disinterested, nonpartisan way, to speak to Canadians The Prime Minister yesterday said that, and he said in his remarks that, and I quote him here, "We're here today to speak about the measures that our government has at hand to protect democracy and to protect our institutions against foreign interference." He said that for some weeks, Canadians have read and heard a very great deal in the news about this issue, about this attempt of foreign interference in our election, in particular from the Chinese government in our federal election. He himself recognized the fact that there were many people raising questions about our democracy, about our agencies that are there to protect us in terms of security, about our parliament, and even, Madam Chair, about our sovereignty as a country. Well, I think that these questions are really the crux of the matter. They are questions that are fundamental, that are basic, that affect all of us. And I can quote the Prime Minister who said that Canadians are paying attention to these questions, to these issues, because they know that protecting our democracy is extremely important. And I'm sure that there's no one, or at least I hope there's no one around the table here, that would say otherwise. Madam Chair, I'm not speaking clearly today. I'm muttering. As I said, we could all agree on these matters. That is, that we want to support the principle of sovereignty, the democratic process that we have here, and that all this represents an issue which is the most important issue that we as members of Parliament can ever deal with. It is not, and it should never be considered a political matter, a political issue. Last week, my colleague, Mr. Julian, by opposing that, and I mean the first motion moved by Mr. Cooper, he gave us notice that he was sending a warning. That is, that we should not invite the staff of ministers or members, or even that of the Prime Minister, to appear. And he quoted a number of people. Mr. Julian in speaking was very consistent, yet very simple in setting out his message. He noted that there were several people who had already made the same argument that day. He said that with respect to what surrounds this issue of political staff appearing before members. He said, no, this doesn't work. It's a bad idea. That it is the ministers who are their bosses who are accountable. And I quote him.
Political staff, as opposed to having ministers being brought forward to testify, I support ministers coming forward to explain what they did, what they knew, and what actions they've taken to ensure this never happens again. Et Madame la Présidente, Monsieur.
Madam Chair, Mr. Julian was very clear on that. The accountability lies with the elected members. They are elected. They have gone through an election, the baptism by fire of an election. And if they are elected, they are accountable. Accountable, Madam Chair. Accountable to Canadians. The political staff hasn't done that. They have never, well, they work to produce options for their bosses. And it is their bosses, the elected members, who take upon themselves the responsibility for what they do, because it is their decision to make and it is their decision to defend. Ministerial accountability, the accountability of all elected members, is, and I can almost use religious terminology here, is something that is almost sacred. It's always been seen that way. And Mr. Julian quoted a former leader, a government leader in the House of Commons. I don't have the French text, so I will read it in English.
Clear case to be made that the accountability of political staff ought to be satisfied through ministers. Ministers ran for office and accepted the role of responsibility of being a minister. Staff did not. Madame la Présidente, la personne dont M. Julien citait.
Madam Chair, the person quoted by Mr. Julian, not even a week ago, it was last Wednesday, was, in fact, the former leader of the government in the House of Commons for the Harper government, and I refer to Mr. J. Hill. Secondly, Madam Chair, Mr. Julian quoted a second member in the House of Commons, a Conservative member, who said, and once again, and I will quote him in Shakespeare's language,
We believe that cabinet ministers are responsible for what happens in their names and responsible to Parliament. This is called ministerial responsibility, and it's one of the oldest traditions of this country. And he goes on to quote, he continue à citer.
He goes on to quote the Conservative.
Wants to do away with this tradition. Instead, he wants to import a foreign U.S. committee system that is used as a political weapon to bully, to intimidate, and to humiliate opponents. something that I believe should never happen. Ça, c'est une citation.
That was a quotation by Conservative. The same Conservative continued.
Accountability is the reason why cabinet ministers answer questions in question period, and it is why they appear before committees to answer for their offices. We hope that all opposition committee chairs will follow the rules and procedures. Je ne vous vise pas, Madame la Présidente.
I'm not targeting you, Madam Chair, but it's very important that I repeat that last part.
All opposition committee chairs will follow these rules, the rules and procedures. Et Madame la Présidente.
Madam Chair, the person quoted is a current colleague, the member for Grand Prairie Mackenzie, who is now the associate whip of, the deputy whip, rather, of the Conservative Party, His Majesty's loyal opposition. And he was speaking to the importance of not having political staff appear, but also to strengthen the tradition and the idea, rather, of accountability, ministerial responsibility, as it was known. Mr. Julian did not end with that, with his quotations of these people. He made, and in fact made the same, they made the same arguments as Mr. Julian last week. With respect to that, inviting the chief of staff of a person who is sitting around the table, the cabinet table, he quoted that, and he believed that it was a quotation that was particularly relevant to the discussion that we had last week. The same discussion, Madam Chair, that we are having for the fourth time now in committee within the parameters of 24 hours of debate. He quoted, and I quote him.
Member knows very well, or the honourable member knows, I'm sorry, for very well that for hundreds of years, the principle of ministerial accountability has been paramount here in the House and in its committees. Et vous savez qui était.
And do you know who the person was who was being quoted here, Madam Chair? It was the same member for Carleton, who is now the leader of the official opposition. Just imagine. The leader of the official opposition was saying that he was quoting a tradition that represented some hundreds of years of tradition in our Westminster parliamentary tradition, a fine tradition, a tradition that over the years, over the course of years, has certainly been able, through error, through initiative, has been able to find a happy medium. Madam Chair, I know that everybody can make mistakes. I've always said to my political staff that I have no problem with errors if an error is made. I'm always ready to try something even if it has failed. And it does happen from time to time. But the only thing I ask of my team, and that I ask of myself as well, is this. If you make an error, if you make a mistake, it should be innovative. You don't need to repeat the same old errors of the past. We don't need to, for a fourth time, go over the same topic. Would you not agree? Let's just stop at 3.
Fool me twice, shame on me. C'est la même chose, Madame la Présidente.
It's the same thing here, Madam Chair. The 4th time. Yes, he's changing the duration of the appearance. 2 hours here, 4 hours there, 3 hours now. Tomorrow, it might be 6 hours on a Thursday, or maybe even an hour and a half. But at a certain point in time, if my honorable colleague for Edmonton St. Albert continues to move the same motion, and Madam Chair, I certainly will bring out the same arguments, because my arguments are the good arguments, the right arguments. They are arguments that find their roots in the very best traditions of our parliamentary system, our Westminster system. And the tradition is this. On a point of order, Madam Chair, I have a great deal of respect for my colleague opposite, but I'd like to ensure, though, that is there a rule to the effect that you can deliberate over a long period of time? The repetition, I know it has to be attached to the subject, but when the person is saying the same thing three times over, or am I mistaken here? Because there are 3 subjects that are very repetitive, and there are people here who would like to intervene, maybe not on everything, but certainly on some things.
So as long as it's relevant to the matter being discussed, it would be suitable. It would be good not to have repetition. And something I notice in this committee and in other places is that when the same thing is said over and over again, that oftentimes it doesn't become more true. So I will give the floor back to Mr. Fergus, and the clerk is just going to check the standing orders to see if there is a spot, because I do think it's relevant. On a point of order, Mr. Turnbull?
Yeah, I was just going to clarify. I know that the deliberations and reflections that Mr. Fergus is relaying to the committee are really insightful and important to hear. From my sense of it, I mean, and you started out by saying this, Mr. Fergus, which was that it seems that we're replaying the same motion over and over again. And so can it really be said by any member that that the remarks that we're making wouldn't also be just as legitimate to repeat. Mind you, obviously, that there's differences in the things that Mr. Fergus is saying, but right? I mean, if the motion is able to repeat over and over again with very subtle changes, are remarks not able to do the same?
Thank you, Mr. Turnbull. Mrs. Soda, did you have a point of order as well?
Well, that's just what I'm. You know what? I think Mr. Turnbull has made the point perfectly. The motions are very subtly different, and remarks are subtly different as well. So I don't see how they can be ruled as repetition or out of order in any way.
So I'm going to just try to keep us moving to see if we can land. And I think there has been times where, as a person who's interested, I do listen for a long time. So I think what I will do is I have a speaking list. So I think it's important to hear from members. And so, Mr. Fergus, I will come back to you. I do believe, and perhaps with the debate, I'll be able to feel otherwise, that we actually have addressed these matters. But at the same time, that's where I want to just understand where members are at. So with that, I will just say, let's stay relevant. Let's try to get ourselves to a good spot. And I'll return the floor to Mr. Fergus.
Merci beaucoup, Madame la Présidente. Et
Thank you, Madam Chair. I've been very careful not to repeat myself during this intervention. I began by decrying the fact that it was the fourth time that we are having a almost similar, a quasi-similar discussion. I expressed the notion of that not being acceptable to debate these issues. I spoke to principle, and then I spoke about the actions that invalidate the speech, and I would say that I'm putting an asterisk right by that because I spoke to the action that was undertaken by the Prime Minister and his government to answer the concerns, the very legitimate concerns of Canadians on this issue of political interference. And then after that, Madam Chair, I reiterated, I went right to the heart of the motion moved by Mr. Cooper. That is to say, this tradition of not inviting, ministers and the lack of invitation in the past for those people who work for us. I quoted in making my arguments the political figures that Mr. Julian cited last week, in fact, last Wednesday. Listen, I could have quoted the Liberals. I could have quoted people on my side, but what I did was I quoted a member of the NDP. I quoted a member of the Conservative Party to balance and to shore up my argument, and I could certainly do so for the Bloc Québécois to demonstrate that, Madam Chair, this motion falls outside the realm of common sense and the fine traditions of our Parliament. I did all that, so I didn't repeat myself. But, Madam Chair, just to continue to speak to the actions undertaken, if you agree with this notion of ministerial accountability and responsibility, let us look to what the Prime Minister did yesterday. The Prime Minister wanted to reassure Canadians, and he announced three things in particular. First of all, Madam Chair, he announced that he was going to appoint a rapporteur, a special independent rapporteur, who will have as a mandate the broadening, the offering of recommendations that are founded in his or her expertise, and will look to the issue of interference in the hopes of protecting and solidifying our democracy. It's so important what he did. And in his presentation yesterday, Madam Chair, he gave an overview of the activities that his government has undertaken. Yes, an overview, a statement of the activities that his government has undertaken to protect and to continue to protect our democracy and to protect our institutions. As you know, Madam Chair, this whole issue of foreign interference is not something new. It's not something that has just occurred yesterday. It has existed in a variety of forms for years now. You might even say for decades. But despite that, Madam Chair, it was Mr. Trudeau's government that really took the bull by the horns after the 2015 election, after what was heard since the 2016 election south of the border, our neighbor's election, and with respect to what was happening with Russia and the disinformation campaign, the misinformation campaign then. But he said at the outset, in so doing, and I will give you the reason why this is important to do so. It is because there is no other time in our history where we have seen such a clear and present danger for the world's democracy, not just for Canada's democracy, but for all democratic countries in the world. There are some state actors and some non-state actors that are linked together to other states that seek to create a climate of instability. a climate of distrust, disdain, a climate where there is no trust in our possibility of acting or governing, where people would feel more at ease with their institutions. They want to foment an attitude of distrust and disdain between peoples, between individuals. Madam Chair, if you allow me to do so, I could make a parenthetical statement here. I had the honor and the pleasure of working for a former member and minister from Quebec, Pierre Pettigrew. Mr. Pettigrew was not only a man of action, but also someone who was very much motivated by ideas. He wrote a book, and if my memory serves me well, because I am now a man of a certain age, I'll read the title in French, but in English.
Et Madame la Présidente,
And Madam Chair, the idea that he put forward in the Politics of Confidence in his book was this: for democracy to function, people have to have a very high level of trust with each other. But those countries, those actors that seek to destabilize democracy, their only objective, their only goal is to sow doubt and distrust between the people and their government. A democracy is so dependent on this notion of trust. I remember saying to my children, if you want to act crazy and sow trouble in our cities, all you need is less than 10% of the people to ignore stop signs. Our security, our safety is really based on the vast majority of people following the rules. When I cross the street, I presume that when people will see a red light, they will stop at the red light, and I will be able to cross the street. On a point of order, I would like my colleague opposite to explain the link between stop signs and traffic signs, and why he is not in favor of the sub-amendment that's on the floor. I need to understand why. Well, he opened a parenthesis. Technically, that may be the case, but surely there should be a rule that would allow everybody to intervene and speak. It's been an hour.
So I will just remind all members that it's important that we stay relevant. And I do believe Mr. Fergus will be wrapping up at some point. Madame Goudreau has asked a question of Mr. Fergus. Mr. Fergus, I will also just share that I do have other people on the speaking list, and perhaps, taking another opportunity to speak later if there is still debate to be had. Mind you, the last points that you referred to in regards to your children and so forth actually are relevant to me, and just so this is kind of some of the conversations we've also had as to what you do and not do. And I think when it comes to interference, insulating our elections and so forth, it is a heavy topic. It does require a lot of different factors, And so I do think we're having a very serious conversation. I'm not sensing that Mr. Fergus is not being sincere. And so if there is other concerns people want to raise, I welcome them. But based on what I'm hearing, and I am listening, I do feel he is raising his concerns, and I do believe this is the time for that, and hence why the agenda we had today, which was on redistribution, and we had members coming from Alberta and from Quebec who are concerned about the ridings, are not with us today because opposition members wanted to have a 1064, an emergency meeting on this. Madame Gaudreau, you were part of the signatories, and I think it's important that if we want to be changing the agenda, because it's such an important topic, then members be given the time to talk on it, because it obviously is important. So with that, I thank you, and I will, Mr. Fergus, with my reminders within my comments, I'm sure you have heard them as well, I will pass you back the floor.
Okay. Madame la Présidente,
Just to answer my colleague, Madam Chair, the reason why I was speaking about that was, and this is, it's an old political move, you know, in debate, when you want to make a caricature of people. Well, that's what you do. But I was speaking to countries that seek to increase the distrust that people have in their institutions, that threaten their trust in their institutions. And just so everybody understands, that was the parallel I was drawing. Madam Chair, all my comments. I'm going to close this parenthesis on the matter of trust. But I was quoting that because the Prime Minister yesterday said that he wanted really an independent report with respect to last week, that the Chinese government and other regimes that you may find in Iran, in Russia, have tried to interfere not only in democracy, in Canadian democracy, but also in our country in general. Let's talk about our institutions, our businesses, our laboratories, our research laboratories, and indeed in the daily life of all Canadians. And that is the reason why I opened the parenthesis earlier. As I said, it was not, Madam Chair, anything new. It's something that has existed well before this government came to power in 2015. But the difference is this. No other government has set in place a dedicated process to counter those threats. They created the NSICOP, the National Security Intelligence Committee of Parliamentarians, that, and in fact, that exists in other countries, that this committee receives information which is unredacted, in real time, dealing with issues of national security. And during the 2021 and 2019 elections, there was a nonpartisan group that was set up of senior officials to examine all these attempts at interference and to be accountable to Canadians, to tell Canadians about the sanctity of our elections. That group determined that these attempts at interference did not compromise the result of our elections. But what's important here, Madam Chair, is that those institutions were, in fact, created. The panel that was created is part of a mechanism, a protocol that was created early in 2019 so that independent experts would be able to communicate openly, clearly, impartially with Canadians during an election in the case that there were any incidents that would threaten the sanctity of our elections. But, Madam Chair, I see that there are other people seeking the floor, as you have said. They wish to speak, and they wish to participate in this debate. I am ready to yield my place, but I would say, Madam Chair, that I have not yet finished dealing with the reasons why I oppose the member for Edmonton St. Albert's motion. And also the reason why I oppose it for the fourth time. This fourth attempt by the member for Edmonton St. Albert. It's very likely, Madam Chair, that I will once again participate in the debate, but I will yield to others who wish to participate in the debate. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Fergus.
Vous avez dit que vous...
You said that you were going to share more with us. Do you want me to add your name to the list now, or you'll let me know if you want to add points later on? Yes, you can add me to the list now. And if people bring up points I'll yield to others. I don't want to repeat things. Well, just so everybody understands, this is who I have on the list: Ms. O'Connell, Ms. Blaney, Madame Goudreau, Mr. Turnbull, and Mr. Fergus again. You have the floor, Ms. O'Connell.
I've asked the clerk to find a relevant standing order, comme vous avez demandé.
As you requested.
It's in regards to repetition and relevance and so forth, but you had asked for a specific standing order, so the clerk is searching one for you, and I will then share that with you at that time. Ms. O'Connell.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I do have comments on this, so I want to make that very clear. But before I get to these comments, I have some technical questions about the procedure that just happened. In regards to the original motion tabled by Mr. Cooper and then the amendments that were accepted as friendly. Now, in my experience, some will argue that friendly amendments are allowed. I have seen that in committee when it's like an amendment of changing, from 4 hours to 2 hours, but I have never seen a friendly amendment accepted without a vote that is this substantive. There is no such thing as that. So first of all, Madam Chair, I'd like to see what are we actually debating, because you can't argue relevance to a motion if we don't know what we're actually speaking to. Are we on the main motion or the amendment, and will the amendment have a vote? Because you can't accept that amendment as a friendly. It needs to be unanimous consent, which you do not have.
Okay, can I just wait, hold on. Every person gets the floor and we don't need to provide commentary. We've demonstrated we can function. Ms. O'Connell, I asked if the words friendly amendment are in that book and the clerk quickly said no. So I'm just going to have a quick conversation with the clerk and I'm going to return to all of you. So perhaps take a moment, stretch, take a breath. I'll be right back. Okay. So I'm just going to come back. Thank you, Ms. O'Connell, for the points you've raised. I'm just going to make sure we have the attention of all members. You've raised a lot of valid points in regards to objections, and I guess what would usually happen is that there would be a motion, there might be a friendly amendment as there was. Once it was raised, because Mr. Cooper did accept it, members could then object. But I also know that members do recognize how I run a meeting, and so most members do tend to wait for their time on the floor. So there is multiple ways we can deal with this. First of all, we could suspend and have some of those fruitful conversations we have and see if there's a way forward. We could ask for UC. If it's not there, Mrs. Blaney could move an amendment to the motion, and then that would follow more of the rules and the books. So would we like to, I'm going to go to Mrs. Blaney.
I'm happy to move that amendment. I would love to see a vote on that.
So, Madam Chair.
So now this is good because I actually had asked for clarification myself and there was some conversation. So what we will do is the debate will continue, and I do feel like Mr. Fergus was kind of dealing with it as an amendment too. I know that Madame Goudreau had mentioned to a sub-amendment, so I think we're maybe more so all on the same page. So we are going to continue the debate on the amendment. Ms. O'Connell, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It's important because there are points of orders being thrown out about what to speak to when the members opposite didn't even actually know what procedurally we were talking about. Because as much as I appreciate the friendliness, that's not how Parliament, and that's certainly not how committee works. So some of the others may want to open those books from time to time. Madam Chair, now that we are clear on what we're actually speaking on, I'd like to speak about a few of the points and where we're at, because it is like Groundhog Day. We have dealt with this, as Mr. Cooper himself has said, 4 times. And so with that being said, one of the things that is being talked about time and time again, we're trying to deal with the very serious issue of foreign interference, our democratic institutions. And what keeps getting thrown out is yesterday we saw that the Prime Minister, again, taking further steps, and the Conservatives continuously refer to it as a secret committee with secret evidence redacted by PMO. Yet once again, just like procedure in this committee, the Conservatives don't speak to things that they know nothing about. They keep referring to NSICOP as they keep referring to NSICOP as this secret committee, yet they have their own members sitting on it. They talk about evidence in NSICOP, yet none of them served on that committee and know anything about the quality of evidence that is there. None of them sat on NSICOP and understand how redactions work, yet they speak about it with certainty. I, on the other hand, sat on NSICOP. I had my security clearance. I respect the work that that committee does. I understand how redactions work. I understand the severity of national security. That's what our government understands. That while conservatives want to take political attacks and speak about secret evidence and secret committees, they are treating Canadians as if they don't understand the significance and the seriousness of why national security is guarded in a way that it is in this country. That why creating committees of parliamentarians where they can actually access this information, but in a way that is done securely, why that matters. Conservatives may not care why that matters. Canadians do. We had significant debate about the creation of NSICOP. Our Five Eyes partners have a committee, a similar version, where parliamentarians or elected officials that are elected can access this information, but in a way that is done securely. Conservatives don't, it's an old saying that I would always hear on my council days of, they don't want to be confused with the truth. And the truth is, you have to handle national security with the security that it deserves. And conservatives playing partisan games with it time and time again, for what? For what? Because they want to bring some staffers in here. For what? What's the end goal? To make national security stronger, our democratic institutions stronger? Why? They don't seem to care about how secure documents are being handled. They don't care to know the precautions that are taken through NSICOP. They don't care to know that it is actually a well-regarded, by international partners, actually, the reports have received accolades from around the world for their work. They don't care that there are recommendations tabled on a regular basis. And they certainly don't care that it was NSICOP's 2019 report tabled in the House of Commons that actually raised foreign interference years ago and the seriousness of it. Because it seems the Conservatives never bothered to read those reports. So if they close their eyes, cover their ears, then they think it doesn't exist. But the fact is, the members on NSICOP do an incredible amount of work. The Secretariat is incredibly professional, nonpartisan. You have representatives from all parties, from the Senate, and this suggestion I take very personally because of my experience on NSICOP. The suggestion that it's some secret committee controlled by PMO is absolutely ridiculous. And it is insulting to the hours and hours and hours worth of work that committee and that secretariat does. And they do so in a way that is so professional to provide the information so the committee can make legitimate reports and recommendations to make our institutions better. But they do so with Canadians in mind in ensuring the safety and security of whether it's our national security officials or the information that we have or the information and partnerships that we have with our Five Eyes partners and our national security partners around the world. So I take great offense to the Conservatives playing spy kids over there on things that they know absolutely nothing about. And they do not take the security of what this government does seriously. And I hear them chattering about this is why they need an inquiry. I urge you, ask your leader, sit on NSICOP. If you're so concerned about national security, do it in the right way. Madam Chair. They should do it in the right way. They should get their national security clearance. They should serve on this committee. They should see the evidence. They should make the recommendations. They should spend the hours and hours and hours and hours in a secure room reading documents. If they sat in those secure rooms reading documents for the number of hours that these members do, they would learn a thing or two. If they had picked up that 2019 annual report that was tabled in the House of Commons, even with the redactions, they would have learned about foreign interference 2 years ago. They would have been able to track and see the recommendations from NCCOP. They could have seen the work that was being done. They could have talked about the site committee. They could have talked about the critical election task force. But they don't. They scroll through Twitter feeds waiting for a partisan opportunity. But the opportunities for this have been here for the last over 7 years. So I take great offense to Conservatives all of a sudden waking up to the seriousness of national security, but under the guise of, like, they're the serious stewards and they are the ones that want to make sure that Canadians know what's happening. But Canadians see through this. Canadians see how reckless and irresponsible Conservatives continue to be because they don't care that there is a reason why all of this information cannot be public. It has nothing to do with the Prime Minister. It has nothing to do with PMO. Madam Chair, it has to do with the fact that this is Canada's most sensitive, top secret information about adversaries trying to undermine our democracy. Conservatives want this information, but so does Beijing. And Conservatives don't seem to care that that's a problem. Conservatives don't seem to care the division that they're trying to sow in making Canadians think that our elections are not secure. They don't seem to think that that's exactly what China would want. That's exactly what Russia would want. And you don't have to believe me. That's what witness testimony concluded. I've said it before and I will say it again. This undermining of our elections is an import from the South that the Conservatives are trying to emulate this Trump style of politics, that it's not them, it's not their bad policies that Canadians rejected. It must have been somebody else. Well, our institutions do need protecting. But what we need protecting from is foreign interference, absolutely. But what we need is Conservative members and parliamentarians to actually grow up and take this stuff seriously, to actually be mature about an issue this serious and actually come to the table with solutions. I've said it before and I will say it again. Why are we not having witnesses from New Zealand, Australia, the UK? Estonia had massive interference from Russia. Why are we not France? I can go on and on. The US, the 2016 presidential election, have all been facing these issues. But instead, we have 4 times talking about trying to bring in a chief of staff instead of actually bringing in witnesses to say, hey, your country are experiencing these issues. It is ever-changing. It is fast-paced. It is becoming more and more it's easier for other countries to try and sow division and fear. And how are you doing it in these other countries? What are you putting in place that Canada isn't? What have you seen that's working that we should emulate? No, instead, we're going to get into, more of this, let's bring in this staffer or that staffer about what happened years ago instead of how are we moving forward to strengthen our democratic institutions. And Canadians are going to see through this. The Conservatives have tried this game before, and it did not work for them. So they're going to repeat their same mistakes. Hey, that's on them. And if Conservatives, again, truly cared about foreign interference and protecting our democratic institutions, again, you don't have to believe me. I'm partisan, no question. But what about their own leader, who is the Minister of Democratic Institutions and did absolutely nothing on this? Maybe we should bring him in. Maybe we should have asked the Conservatives all the things that they did for 10 years to strengthen our democratic institutions. Crickets. You will hear crickets. So if we want to be serious and if we want Canadians to see that we can put partisan politics aside to do right by them, to ensure that our democratic institutions are protected into the future, then let's use this opportunity in a public forum to bring in witnesses, to bring in officials, to bring in that experience, to make recommendations to the government. At the same time, allow NSICOP to do the work in a secure manner, which again, I point out they already had and brought forward these things. It's just, it seems that members of the Conservative Party never bothered to read it. But now that they're paying attention, let's have them do that work again. I have a lot of trust in the Secretariat. They're incredibly professional. They're extremely well regarded around the world. And I think even the nationals, our intelligence community respects the work that NSICOP does. And trust that the information can be handled securely. Because what I do fear in this country is that if national security is played with in a partisan way, what will happen is the national security community will become fearful to release information, will become fearful that it is going to be played with, that lives will be at risk, that our Five Eyes partners will say Canada's a joke on national security. We can't share information with you because, you know, parties want unredacted versions in open sessions. And then who suffers? Canadians. Our security gets weaker. Our reputation gets weaker. Our institutions don't get stronger. Russia is cheering. China is cheering. Other adversaries are cheering. And what? Conservatives put out a tweet. Are we really willing to risk the grand issues at stake here when we have the ability for NSICOP, like I said, to do their work in a way that is well respected, secure, that is the information is handled with extreme caution and care, but it is provided. NSICOP is incredibly professional. They have representatives from every party, the Senate. So it is not a partisan thing. They have a very clear and separate mandate, not sure if anyone's read that, about how those how their recommendations are handled in that process, because it is not controlled by the PM or PMO, and that was built into legislation. So you can do that work. You have a special rapporteur that will also look at it, and CIRA can also be involved. I was in the House last night when the Prime Minister was making his announcement of these new measures, and the Conservatives come running in with papers going, you know, talking about how this is ridiculous, that they don't even know what a rapporteur is. Well, Madam Chair, I think it's absolutely crazy that because the Conservatives didn't know what a rapporteur was, they said it was too fancy, this fancy word, that was somehow why it was a bad idea. The point is, you can say special 7 more times, it doesn't make you look smarter. But Madam Chair, the point is that there are opportunities here through NSICOP to handle these documents with care, to get that report. There's a special rapporteur that will ensure that NSICOP and CIRA have the information, can make the recommendations, and at the same time, don't worry, I'm not forgetting about the importance of this committee. At the same time, there is a lot of work that this committee can actually do to make our institutions stronger, to inform Canadians about the seriousness of foreign interference. we can learn a lot from allies who have been experiencing this for years. We can be hearing that testimony. We can be learning about what works, what hasn't worked, how the threat is changing, who some of these bad actors are. And we could actually be putting forward recommendations to the government from this committee. And we can take that work, the work of this committee, we could take the work of NCIRA, NSICOP, a special rapporteur, and make an actual fulsome document that the government can consider, that will have all parties' ideas and viewpoints represented. It will take the care and caution with national security sensitive information that Canadians expect a mature and responsible government to do. Or, Madam Chair, we can go down the road of silly games and a kangaroo court and playing partisan politics with one of the most serious things that any government should be worried about, thinking about, and taking precautions on. You know, whenever the next election is, I think that Canadians are going to see that it's not leadership. It's not leadership when you're willing to throw out every principle and value that you can have as a country out the window because you get some giggles over on the other side, because they're having some fun over there, because, you know, they think that this is going to be something to talk about, but they are once again providing no solutions. And I think Canadians are going to see through this. I know Canadians are smart enough to know that playing games with national security only weakens our country. Playing partisan politics with national security, with the independence of our elections. Just turn on the news in the South and see the division that that's causing. And I'm willing to bet that Canadians do not support the division of questioning elections without significant evidence, and the idea of rationalizing a loss and trying to suggest that the elections were not held by Canadians or the decisions were not upheld by Canadians, when we have heard time and time again from nonpartisan experts that it was Canadians who it was Canadians who decided the outcome of elections, and time again it was determined that they were free and fair. But if Conservative members want to keep playing games and create division and confusion instead of solutions and strengthening our institutions, then, you know, I don't think Canadians are going to see that there's a responsible, mature alternative. And I think it's really sad for our democracy that we would actually run the risk of going down the path of democracies around the world that have fallen into this trap. So I think PROC has a very real and unique opportunity here. There are other things on the PROC agenda that I know are important to many members and should also be handled, but I do think we can walk and chew gum at the same time. And I think that even on this report, on this study, there is a lot of meat on this bone that this committee can deal with, but by calling in staff and trying to create a political circus instead of trying to actually contribute to the conversation around how do we make our institutions stronger, how do we ensure that although our elections were free and fair, that they continue to do so. And I think there's a lot we can do. I think there's a lot of recommendations we can take. But, Madam Chair, if the Conservatives want to continue to play this game, they've done it before. You know, before the last election, the Conservative, when it was, I always lose track of which leader they were on. But,
sorry, Ms. O'Connell, 1 second. Point of order, Mr. Cooper.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to make clear that you do not have the implied consent of the official opposition to adjourn at 1 o'clock.
So, Mr. Cooper, I will just state that it's one thing during constituency week, so we will know what resources are available and so forth, and we will follow the process. But I do appreciate your assistance in my chair duties at all times, so I thank you for that. Ms. O'Connell?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I think just following up on, what I was saying was I always forget which leader they were on. There were so many, but the Conservatives in the last attempt to play games with foreign interference, the Conservatives under Mr. O'Toole decided their solution would be to, take their toys and go home. And instead of having more information, they pulled their members off of NSICOP. How did that work out for them? Did Canadians view them as noble, valued-based members? No. They saw them for what it was. A cheap trick because they didn't get what they wanted. Because they couldn't use national security as a partisan weapon in an election. So then the next leader comes in and puts their members back on. That will be the mature thing to do. Well, now it's very clear the lack of respect and knowledge for what the incredibly hard work that NSICOP does. Incredibly hard. And you should read some of the accolades, Madam Chair. I would encourage all members of this committee to actually read some of the accolades that NSICOP has received from around the world on their work and on their reports. Because it's always a tough balance between, and we've heard it from officials here time and time again, the balance between what do you share with Canadians because you do want that transparency, you want people to know so that they can be on the lookout for the issues, to be aware of what's going on in the world. But there is that balance of also protecting our national security, whether it's our personnel in the field doing this work, whether it's protecting those relationships we have with our allies. All of that is incredibly, incredibly important. And that is why that balance is sometimes hard to strike, I'll be honest. It would be wonderful if we could just share everything and then know it's not going to fall into the wrong hands. But I think, as mature parliamentarians and as any responsible government would say, we have to make decisions that are going to be right for Canadians, but also ensure that those consequences don't do a greater harm. And that's what is on the line when it comes to the care of national security documents. But when Conservatives put their members back on NSICOP, it was an acknowledgement that this committee does important work. And now they won't even say the name NSICOP. They don't refer to it. They refer to it as a secret committee with secret evidence, controlled by the Prime Minister. How scary sounding. When in fact, it is an incredibly professional committee that works well beyond partisan lines. And I'm willing to bet that if they spoke to even their own members on this committee, they would say how hard the committee works, how nonpartisan it is. But, again, don't be confused by the facts. That's the mantra that I'm seeing with the Conservative Party these days. So, we can keep coming back, as my colleague Mr. Fergus pointed out, that 4 times and probably more to debate the same motion, to spend committee time on debating the same motion, or we could actually get to work, come together, acknowledge that we have work to do to continue to strengthen our institutions. We have a lot of professionals within the Canadian public service. Academia would be incredibly helpful. We've had witnesses from all kind of walks of life. And there, I think there are more opportunities for additional witnesses, and there's more opportunities for this work. And so we could actually come together and say, hey, what are some of the objectives we want to see here? We've heard about a foreign registry. I would love to have more conversations about how that looks. The Prime Minister has indicated that that's something that he's tasking ministers at looking at. We could actually provide insight. All members of this committee could actually provide some insight into that work. But instead, we're going to keep having 106.4s. We're going to keep having the same debate on the same motion. And for what? Because Conservatives want to bring staff in, and they think that it will be some sort of, winnable moment for them. Maybe there'll be a partisan hit. Maybe you guys will, sorry, Madam Chair, through you, maybe the Conservatives will land a punch. I don't know. But does that actually help Canadians in the long run? Does it actually strengthen our institutions? Because the Conservatives will get a tweet, or they'll get a photo they like, or they'll get a headline they like. Maybe. But does it make our democratic institutions stronger? Does it make the next election stronger? Does it ward off foreign interference? Does it keep Beijing at bay? Does it stop Russia from trying again? No, absolutely not. So you can sell your morals and your values to play a game. And listen, I'm the first to get up in the House and I'll take a partisan swipe and I have no problem. But there are certain things that I think if you really care about this job, if you really care about our democratic institutions, there should be some red lines. And I think sharing national security information in the public realm should be a red line that we all agree to. If you think that dragging staffers in for, a day of headlines or a few good tweets at the expense of a meeting where we could actually do work to make sure future elections are actually protected, if members think that's value, if that's what their constituents sent them here to do, that's between them and their constituents. I would like to be able to look at myself in the mirror, go to my constituents and say, I want to do this work, but I'm going to do so in a way that I think is going to be optimal to make the situation better. Because that's how serious national security is. That's how serious it is when Canadians no longer determine elections. But Conservative members, get your tweets, get your headlines, but if it doesn't make our institutions stronger, what have you actually done for Canada? Will this testimony actually make our institutions stronger? Will it protect the next election? Will putting unredacted national security secrets in an open forum because some members are curious about what they say, instead of actually being able to read them in a very secure manner? So it's not that that members don't have access. It's that it's done so in a secure manner. But because there's trying to put that information public, would members opposite be comfortable if an agent in the field or if someone collecting that information, if that was then eventually used to actually harm someone serving our country? But you got a tweet out of it, right? Toronto Sun maybe wrote a nice column about you. That'd be cool. Or if our national security community could no longer collect information because our allies didn't feel comfortable sharing it, and therefore we became a little less safe. But some members got it to giggle in this committee. Some members got to tweet in this committee. Is that a trade-off that Conservatives are willing to make? I'm certainly not. So we have a choice. Be serious. Let's continue our meetings on foreign interference. Let's continue to bring in experts and talk about very real ways that we can deal with the next elections, how to make site better, how to make the critical election protocol better, how to learn from other jurisdictions that are going through this. Or we can keep debating the same amendment, the same motion, and go down that road and actually achieve nothing of substance. And then Canadians can judge who are the leaders and who are going to take their safety and security seriously. How will our Canadian Armed Forces, our intelligence community view how members act with their lives on the line? We're sitting in here in a cushy committee room. Well, there are people out doing the very real work that irresponsible motions have consequences for. So I'm not prepared to throw the national security, Canada's reputation, and the safety of those who actually serve this community and do this work. I'm not willing to throw that out the window because Conservatives want to play games with and take partisan shots with the very real work that we're going to do and can do. So, Madam Chair, I've said it before, but I'm just going to conclude on this point. We have an opportunity to do very real work in this committee in conjunction with the very real work that NSICOP and Sarah and a special rapporteur can do to provide recommendations and a report in a way that the information is handled in a secure manner, is classified, and is handled in a way that, again, takes our safety and security seriously, that a mature, responsible government would do. And we can do all that work together and provide a report, and Canadians can determine, if it's enough, if it's being taken seriously enough, and that is all fair game. Or we can continue on however many meetings we've done this now for. We can continue on the road of playing partisan games with no real solutions coming forward and using committee time for headlines and for tweets and really offer no solutions. Madam Chair, I would like to get to work on this. I would like this committee to provide very real recommendations. And I would be very willing to, keep that study going, to hear that witness testimony, to actually write a report, to hear all perspectives from all members of this committee, and I think do the work that Canadians expect us to do in a mature, responsible manner. So as long as motions keep coming forward that I don't think build to actually make our next election more secure, to actually hold off foreign interference, then I'm inclined not to support it. If a motion comes forward where it will actually produce recommendations and results that will help us move in that forum, then I'm happy to consider it, and I'm happy to advocate that we actually come forward with a very real report with recommendations that might be tough for any government to have to implement, but at least we're doing that work. So, but as long as we're going to play partisan games with national security, I'm going to fight really, really hard to make sure that mature, responsible, and reasonable decisions are made instead of reckless, irresponsible, partisan games with something that is so incredibly important and has such serious consequences if handled incorrectly. So I'll leave it there, Madam Chair, and depending on the rest of the debate, I may add, but I'll let you know. I may add my name again, but I'll let you know. Thank you.
Thank you for that clarification. Mrs. Blaney.
Well, thank you, Chair, and I thank everybody for this very interesting conversation. And I guess I just have a few things that I feel are really important to say. First of all, I will say that it has, and I talked about this earlier, it has been the practice of myself and the NDP that we do not support bringing staff. And I appreciate Mr. Fergus quoting the amazing MP Peter Julian and the work that he did in this committee and the things that he said. And that is largely the position that the NDP take. People are elected, they make decisions, staff implement those decisions. However, we cannot pretend that those statements that Mr. Julian said happened, and then the next day we were opening papers with more leaks coming out of CSIS. Like, I just feel frustrated right now. Our leader was very clear. He said, let's have a public inquiry. This place and this committee has supported the NDP motion to have a public inquiry, and it will be tabled in the House very soon, I'm sure. That is a transparent process because Canadians are now worried. I'm not doing this because I like to tweet and get a good headline. I will take the punches. I have been in this room and I've said, no, I will not support having documents looked at that way because I care about national security, because I represent a base in my community, 19 Wing, where people are called on in my community to serve this country. And I take that very seriously because their lives are literally on the line when we ask them to do that. So I don't want information coming out in a way that is going to jeopardize Canadians or the people who serve this country. That matters to me. So I don't want an immature process. But I cannot also take away the reality of how many leaks have been coming out that have been saying things that are directly related to a person that we have named in this motion. And so until there's a transparent process through a public inquiry where there can be processes put in place to make sure that all of our security is addressed, that we're not leaking information out that is going to be harmful to the people who serve our country, I just don't see how we can do anything but go through this process in PROC. It's really unfortunate that we're here. We've been very clear about what we want to see, but those things are not happening. And the Prime Minister had an opportunity yesterday in his announcement to have that be part of the announcement. He chose not to. So here we are today having this discussion. And the other reality for me is that Canadians care about this. Canadians are emailing my office. They are worried that our systems are not strong enough, that our institutions are not strong enough. And you know what? I agree. I agree that often the Conservatives use information in a way that I would not use it. That there's a lot of political points that they're trying to make that is very harmful. And I will say it publicly, and I just have. They can use it in whatever way they want. They do that. But the other part is this government left a void. If you've got people concerned and you've got people bringing up information in a way that is not appropriate, then that's really on the government to create a response that is meaningful. Because the more fear that we have in our communities, in our institutions, and I've said this through this whole study, how many times in this study have I prefaced everything I said by how do we make sure that Canadians have faith in our institutions, that everything that we do around this table should be around this. And this has become partisan. It's a committee. There's different parties that are represented here, and we're all going to have our partisan perspective, which is exactly why our leader said, let's take this out of that partisan realm. Let's put this in a public inquiry so that there is an accountability measure to Canadians. That is why this is so important. So I appreciate and I deeply respect the work of NSICOP. I absolutely do. They do important work and I appreciate it. The problem is, at this point, so much misinformation, so much leaks have come out that Canadians don't have security. So if we have NSICOP do the work, it's not public enough. So I'm not talking about the details behind it. I'm talking about the process where the public is included in this system. So this is where we're at. So I will fight every single time to make sure that we don't have documents used in a way that could be harmful to the people of this country. I think that the fact is when the Conservatives put forward things around the legal clerk or the law clerk, they do not have specific training in national security. We cannot allow information to be out there in that way. We cannot. We have to make sure that we're protecting our institutions and we're protecting Canadians and we're protecting our elections. But today, the motion that we're talking about does not have anything about documents. It's about how do we figure out what was happening at a time? How do we address the issues that this information is being leaked repeatedly? And I also want to say that the place that it is being leaked to, these are journalists with certain ethics and requirements. So we have to trust that when they're saying this is happening, that there's something behind it that we have to look into. Speculation creates fear. And that's what we're seeing. We're seeing more and more fear. I'm hearing it in my riding. People are talking to me about it as I'm out doing the things that I do to spend time with my constituents. That means that we need to have something. And that's why the NDP brought forward the idea of a public inquiry. That's why we fought so hard in this place to make sure that we had a motion that said that, and that's why our leader called for it. So I agree. We need to depoliticize this situation. I think my friend Mr. Fergus talked about that. I agree that in this room it is getting really politicized. So again, let's see the Prime Minister step up and not just make the announcement that he made, but actually see that investment in a public inquiry so that we have something to hold on to. Every opposition party yesterday called for a public inquiry. So let's see what we can do to make that happen. This was not easy for me. I struggled with this as I struggle with everything. As an elected official, I believe fundamentally that if you are not struggling most of the time, you're not doing your job well. When we have hard situations, we have to think about them, we have to ponder them, and we have to consider the implications of every decision that we make, not only on our careers, but most importantly on the lives of Canadians. So I think this is quite frustrating to be here. I know that we're getting close to 1 o'clock. I don't know if we're going to continue on. I do want to say to the committee, I'm not interested in seeing other committees shut down. So just something for food for thought. Our work is really important here, but I don't think any committee's work is less important, and we need to be mindful of that. And from my understanding, and maybe the clerk can let us know if we were to extend, how many other committees would be canceled. And I guess the other thing is I see in our meeting notice for Thursday that this will be the issue that we're talking about again. So I would just like that confirmed that Thursday will continue on this. But I also want to just speak to the fact that we do have important work to be doing in this committee. We have really important work. We're talking about the election boundaries of our next, in the future federal elections. We have people who want to talk about the concerns that they have about ridings that they represent or ridings that they feel connected to. We need to be doing that work. So I hope that we can get through this part to the next step. I am not trying to make a big play. I think everybody in this table knows that I am not a person who comes here to play partisan politics super man-like. We definitely all have people like that. I am not that person. I want a reasonable solution to a very complex and hard question, an issue and situation. I also want there to be some sort of transparency so that Canadians can be assured. They need to know that their institutions work for them. They need to know that when there is comments about the institutions not working for them, that we make sure that they do work for them. And we all know, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to know that misinformation being used by foreign entities that want to undermine our democratic ability to govern ourselves and to break down fundamentally the well-being and connection of our communities is happening. We've heard of it many times where false, groups are made on different forms of social media. They engage people who have particular fears. They ramp up those fears, and then bad things happen in the community as a result of it. We need to take this seriously, because if we have people coming into our communities and talking to folks and making them more afraid so that they either don't participate in our democratic situation, which is why I will also remind this table that I've brought up again and again, that we want to make sure that rural and remote communities have access to good information. We know that local papers are struggling profoundly across this country, and that is something that is good information as opposed to just social media that we don't know the source of. We know that ethnic communities are targeted. We know that Indigenous communities are targeted. So we need to make sure that those issues are dealt with. I stood in the House and asked for unanimous consent to get that happening. I didn't get that unanimous consent. I'm hoping in this committee we can be talking about that. These things all matter. It is our democracy, and Our democracy is reflective of how our communities are doing. So if our communities are being ripped apart by false information, by foreign interference, we have an obligation as members of parliament to take that seriously. And unfortunately, we're put in a situation where there are so many leaks that we have to do something. I don't want to be here. I don't want to be bringing staff in, but we must take action. We cannot sit here and not take action when Canadians are saying to us very clearly, we don't believe these systems are strong enough. We don't believe the government is being transparent. We want action and we want answers. So I will do my job, and I hope everyone around this table will also do their job. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to answer a couple of things. So this morning at 9:33, I received a message to say that I received the report on the motion that was passed last week. The House sat at 10 a.m. I acknowledged that message at 9:45 a.m., and it's unrealistic for me to be in the House to present a report with that kind of notice. I take my role very seriously, and I think you can tell by my decorum in this meeting and keeping people moving along that I do. So that report will be presented tomorrow, as I have always done. The people on the subcommittee will know when I'm presenting the reports. I have always provided that courtesy. It's happened up until now. It will continue to happen unless I provide notice otherwise. So the report, stay tuned. It will be presented in the House tomorrow if everything goes well. On the concept of resources, I have been given signal that we have resources till about 2 o'clock today. There is agreement from all members, all parties in the House, that we are adjourning the day after question period because we have a speaker tonight. In the House of Commons, yes, we have a guest speaker coming, and that's what is the agreement of the House. You can speak to them. So after question period, that's what will happen. There's an address at 6:30 p.m. tonight. You need to be in your seats by 6. So, Mr. Cooper, I'm going to finish speaking because that's how it works here. On Thursday, so what we will do is, because there is an appetite on this conversation, if need be, we will continue this conversation because it's important that we have the space for it. I think I've demonstrated that. On Thursday, we do have a minister confirmed, but we will try to find a way that will work best with all members. I will have those conversations to figure it out. We have to remember, as chair, I do have some abilities. I have not tried to abuse them. I have used them very respectfully, and I will continue to do that. And at some point, there needs to be an understanding that there might be some women in this House who also know the rules. And to that, I will say there's women in the House following me today. I'm sorry you don't get to have lunch with me, but you will get lunch, and I look forward to spending some time with you later because committees sometimes have to continue, and when we have resources, we need them to continue, and it's really important work. I'm sure you're noticing that with the tone and temperament of this conversation. So, Mrs. Blaney, I just want to answer your questions. With that, Madame Goudreau's been waiting very patiently. We will be going past 1 o'clock clearly. The floor is yours, Madame Goudreau.
Chair, before Madame Goudreau begins, let me just say that we've been advised that as far as
Sorry, if I'm just going to correct myself. Based on the information I received, I reported afternoon meetings are happening.
6.
Evening meetings have been canceled.
So we can go.
We don't have resources.
6 committees are sitting until 5, between 3:30 and 5:30.
We do not have resources without putting another committee out of spot, and
That's
that
not,
was a
that's
concern.
not the information that I have.
That is, the
we
clerk,
had
you can
there-
challenge the clerk, but we're hearing we have resources till 2, and that's what I've said. Excellent. Well, have your people talk to our people. Madame Goudreau, the floor is yours.
Madame Chair, I'll be specific and very concise. I've been taking notes. I've been taking notes of everything I've heard this morning. And from the outset, I'd like to say this. The first information that I heard, the first element was that this isn't a game that we're playing. I'm telling you, Madam Chair, I was really quite taken aback by that, to hear that. What's more important than what we are doing? The game has been going on for 2 hours. It's a right. I agree, it's a right. It's well done. All right, I agree. But I would like to put some parts of this back into perspective. When we heard earlier that, yes, but there is work that is to be done. Yes, it is true. There is work. There is work that was done in the past. So be it. But was it sufficient? Was it appropriate? And where we're sitting today, looking back, the answer is this, and I'm going to shore up what I'm saying by something scientific. There are 3 surveys that have come out. The people from Laurentides de la Belle are calling me daily, and I have to be able to look at it. A street poll, 66% of people are concerned about Chinese interference. 7 out of 10 people believe that the government is afraid of standing tall. Well, you're going to tell me that maybe this is not a great methodology, but these are surveys. And another one, 64% are in favor of a public independent inquiry. Okay, let's go with this. We're taking a lot of time. But what do we want to shed light on? Why have we waited so long, Madam Chair? Because of all the good practices that exist to correct the direction in which we're going? So what can we know from all this? Nothing. It's being hidden. The proof is this. I spoke to some citizens yesterday who were saying to me, well, what the heck? What is this happening now with the government? Have you heard this? Just between us and the government, we have to choose together, without partisanship, a chair that would be able to do his or her work in a commission of inquiry to do this independently. Well, you know, when you look at what happened last week, it should be clear. And then I'm going to appoint, as he said last night, a rapporteur. I will appoint a rapporteur. That means I will decide. And then when people look at us, and I'm not the only person who's embarrassed by all this. Madam Chair, we want to save our democracy. You know, we've been doing this for hours now, and all the hours we spent last week, 48 hours, 50 hours or more were spent with We Charity. Just think back what happened there. Just trust us, we were told. Well, how are we going to be able to gain back the little bit of trust that remains? They have to have the humility of admitting that maybe there are good ideas out there, that there are better ideas than those expressed yesterday. Quite simply, little steps, baby steps at a time to be able to do something in the future. Maybe the opposition, all opposition parties, may well have strategies, may well have good ideas and elements to put forward. I've explained that to my constituents, but each time it seems no. We talk about, in my area, an eel hiding under a rock, the snake, the proverbial snake under the rock. Well, we know what the answer is, don't we? We are all thinking about it. So, Madam Chair, I would like to talk at greater length, but I'm not going to be like my colleagues. We have a proposal here. We have an amendment, and this is what we would like to see voted on. I can tell you from the outset, all this argument, all this discontent that I have been listening to, but the answer really is yes. Madam Speaker, we have to come to a vote. We have to decide the issue. That's what I have to say. Thank you very much, Madame.
Thanks, Madam Chair. And I've been listening very intently to all the comments made by all of the members of this committee, which I greatly respect. And you know, I know that we've been debating this amendment for some time now. We've heard quite a few arguments and perspectives. I'm wondering whether we should proceed to a vote on the amendment. And perhaps, I think there's one other speaker after me, if I'm not mistaken, Madam Chair, or two. So perhaps we can move to a vote. I would like to say, though, I would like to be added to the list to speak to the main motion after the vote, if that's possible.
It's good. So you're ready for the vote on the amendment, is what you're suggesting? I have Mr. Fergus followed by Mr. Cooper.
I'm in the same situation as Mr. Turnbull, Madam Chair. I would like to put my name on the list to debate the motion, and then before that, I would like to withdraw my name from the current list on the amendment so we can vote. You are the first, Mr. Fergus, for the debate on the amendment because you were already on the list. No, I'm sorry. It should be on the motion. Mr. Cooper said he's not going to speak now, perhaps later. And so we're ready to take the vote. I will put the question.
On the amendment.
Mr. Fergus. Ms. O'Connell. Ms. Romanato.
Contre.
Ms. Sahota.
No.
Mr. Turnbull.
Against.
Mr. Berthold. Mr. Barrett.
Yay.
Mr. Cooper.
In favor?
Mr. Nader.
In favor.
Madame Gaudreau. Oui. And Ms. Blaney.
Yes.
Yeas pour 6, nays contre 5.
The amendment carries. And with that, we are on to a point of order. On that, we are on to the main motion as amended. We'll go with Mr. Fergus, followed by Mr. Turnbull.
Madam Chair, I spoke at great length earlier. I am very interested by Mr. Turnbull's intervention, so I'll withdraw my name and I'll put my name at the end of the list. Thank you.
Merci, Monsieur Fergus.
Thank you, Mr. Fergus.
Thanks to my colleague, Mr. Fergus, for being so gracious and kind to me. I've certainly been listening and preparing lots of remarks, but perhaps before I do that, I'd like to introduce an amendment to the motion. So I'll start by moving this. So I move that the motion be amended by replacing the words after in relation to its study of foreign election interference with the following text. Invite the
Mr. Turnbull,
Yes?
sorry, I just want to confirm to maintain some order. Have you shared that with the clerk in both official languages?
Yes, I believe we have. Yep.
We've just received it. If we can just wait a couple of seconds to make
Sure.
sure everyone has it, just keeps us on the same page. You have the floor, and I'll return the floor to you once I confirmed everyone has it. Thank you. Okay, I understand everyone's received it. With that, Mr. Turnbull, I'll provide you back the floor. Excellent.
Thanks, Madam Chair. So I'll start from the beginning. So I move that the motion be amended by replacing the words after "in relation to its study of foreign election interference" with the following. Invite the 2019 and 2021 national campaign directors of each recognized party in the House of Commons and the security cleared party representatives to the Security and Intelligence Threats to Elections Task Force, that's the SITE Task Force, during the 2019 and 2021 federal elections, period. And the French translation is there as well. So I'd like to speak to that and address some of the comments that were made by Mr. Cooper at our beginning of our meeting today, which I found quite troubling listening to and reviewing all the information that we've had at our disposal, as well as the multiple reports, which I've taken the time to do. You know, I pride myself in researching and reading through the various documents that were provided, and also doing my own research on these topics, because I take these matters extremely seriously, especially when there are allegations flying around and quite a lot of political rhetoric that I think could be injurious to our democracy as a whole in terms of undermining our democratic institutions. In particular, you know, one of the false claims that we keep hearing from the Conservative Party of Canada over and over again, they repeat the same thing, that the Prime Minister and our government has done nothing when it comes to foreign election interference. This couldn't be further from the truth. Based on all of the documents I have in front of me, there is ample evidence from the very first days of this government. I wasn't a part of in those days, but there's ample evidence to show a track record of significant work that's been done on this issue, at least as far back as 2017, and I think it's safe to say right from 2015, when the Liberal government that's currently running the country first got elected. So I think, you know, I would like to take some time refuting that claim, but I also want to talk to a couple of other assertions that have been made over and over again that are deeply troubling. One is the Conservatives keep saying, and some opposition parties seem to be chiming in a chorus of support for this, that they're interested in getting to the bottom of this. And what's interesting to me is that when you look at all of the nonpartisan and independent processes that have been set up by our government, and you look at this committee and how many witnesses have already come forward with significant expertise in national security, we haven't heard anything to demonstrate that this government isn't willing to get to the bottom of this. So what strikes me as just pure political, you know, rhetoric and games, to be honest, is this somehow claim that somehow we are not interested in getting to the bottom of these matters. Quite the contrary is true. In fact, our government has been getting to the bottom of these matters and has demonstrated a real dedication and commitment to addressing foreign election interference. The other thing that I found really troubling about Mr. Cooper's claims at the beginning of this meeting today was that somehow the PM has instructed us to do some obstructionary work, and I think that is also 100% false. I know I speak for myself, and I probably can speak for all my colleagues, that we're here of our own volition, that we take our work at this committee very seriously, and to imply that we're somehow being controlled by somebody else is insulting, to be frank. I also want to say that there's been a significant shift in the messaging over recent days from the leader of the official opposition, who I would remind people was the former Minister of Democratic Reform. And if you look back on the record, I'm not sure there was much done on foreign election interference in the time that Pierre Poilievre was the Minister of Democratic Reform. Now, the shift in messaging that I've seen is the leader of the official opposition has gone from saying that yes, there were attempts at election interference, but that their party stood by the results of the election, to some very recent remarks which are significantly different than that message. And let me just read a couple of quotes here. So I believe it was just yesterday, the leader of the official opposition said, "We've never seen an intelligence service so worried about the Prime Minister and his collaboration with a foreign power." He's also said, "They're so concerned how Canada is working against its own interest and for a foreign dictator's interests." So this is, like these claims are somehow implying that our Prime Minister is working against the interests of Canadians and, in a way, collaborating with a foreign power to undermine our democracy. And that couldn't be further from the truth. It's like, I don't have words to describe how much I think that that's inappropriate language. It's untrue, it's unfounded. And it's, really risking our entire democracy and the faith that Canadians have in our democracy by making such claims, baseless claims. I mean, if they were founded, of course, there could be, those claims could be made, but they're unfounded. So the other thing I want to point out is that, further to my colleague, Mr. Fergus, and P. O'Connell, both of whom I have great respect for, and who made some very compelling arguments in their remarks today. But we have set up all of these different mechanisms within our government's mandate to protect against foreign election interference, and so we know that on the one hand there's nonpartisan public servants. Senior public servants within the caretaker period that are part of the panel for the critical election incident public protocol and panel, that they take part in that during the caretaker period. We also know that outside of that caretaker period, our government has implemented what Rosenberg refers to as an electoral ecosystem approach, which is an all-of-government approach to combat foreign election interference. And that this has four pillars: enhancing citizen preparedness, improving organizational readiness, combating foreign interference, and building a healthy information ecosystem. What I want to say about this is that on the one hand, our government has set up a process, i.e. the protocol and panel, that even within an election period, in a writ period, or where the caretaker convention applies, that there is a rigorous set of nonpartisan senior officials that have expertise and are informed by the site task force, which is composed of experts in national security from all of our agencies that are providing them with regular briefings. And that's just within the caretaker period. And then we have an independent assessment done after every election. And let's also be honest that if we actually look at and evaluate, well, from the James Judd report, which was an independent assessment, how many of the recommendations were implemented? And we'd see that the vast majority of them, if not all of them, have been implemented. I think there is maybe one that hasn't been implemented, and that's because the government didn't necessarily agree with that one, or took a different approach. And similarly, within the 16 recommendations or so that were made by Morris Rosenberg, which I take very seriously. I've read this report, and I think there's a lot of substance there that this committee could be deliberating on. We could be really drilling down on those recommendations. So instead of playing political games, which to me, the original motion that Mr. Cooper put forward, which is to, have political staffers here. I mean, they're not national security experts. We have all of the deputy ministers. We have the national security and intelligence advisor to the prime minister. We've had the director of CSIS. Like, the list goes on and on. I actually have the list of witnesses here if you want me to read them out. But it's you couldn't ask for a better list of witnesses to come before this committee. And so I don't see what the rationale is when you have ministerial accountability outside of the caretaker period, and you have the officials and experts which inform them coming to this committee, and then you have the public servants, nonpartisan public servants that are doing the work within the caretaker period which are coming forward. What more information could you possibly really want for if your motivation was truly to get to the bottom of this and to take this matter seriously, then why wouldn't you be listening to the people that have the expertise? That's not good enough for the official opposition. It's not good enough because they want to push a narrative that is counter to the interests of our democracy and our democratic institutions. It's one that tries to undermine our democracy and our institutions. And that I will not stand for. I want to talk for a moment, Madam Chair, about the fact that our government took up recommendations from an extensive report that was done in 2018. So the Ethics Committee in 2018 produced a report, or did a study that produced a very significant report called Democracy Under Threat, Risks and Solutions in the Era of Disinformation and Data Monopoly. And that the chair at the time was Bob Zimmer, and I know the Conservatives will know Bob. And that report is over 100 pages. It's got significant recommendations to it, many of which have been acted on. And if you trace back to the government response to that report, you can actually see that many of the things that unfolded after that report was published were responded to by the government and actually implemented. So again, it points to the fact that there is no basis for this absurd claim that our government doesn't take foreign election interference seriously, and the absurd claim, the false claim, that the government has done nothing on this. So let me just say, let me stack this up a little bit in terms of what the government has done. So going back to that ethics report, which I assume was happening over the course of a significant period because it's a pretty extensive study. As we know, these things can take months and months to hear from witnesses and then deliberate. But what I can see from that is in 2018, that report was published. A government response came in shortly after. I'm not sure I have the date on the government response, but it was shortly after. And many of these things were then acted on. So one, obviously the critical election incident public protocol and panel were set up, which was first established before the 2019 election. The plan to protect Canadian democracy, which is that 4-pillar plan, which outlines an all-of-government approach, was implemented as well. So, and that's listed in the Rosenberg report. He takes the time to go through the various different initiatives that unfolded and were implemented out of that. So I'd like to speak to those for a moment. So one of the pillars of that all-of-government approach, or sometimes referred to as the electoral ecosystem approach, and let's be honest, foreign election interference can't be tackled with just one intervention. It's a systematic set of strategies and interventions that cut across all of our ministries and institutions that's required. And so there's a lot of collaboration with many of our other systemic issues. We know that we need an all-of-government approach, and I think all of us are familiar with calls to the government of having a whole-of-government approach. Well, this is exactly what our government has been implementing, and there's evidence of this. So for committee members to claim that the government hasn't done anything just ignores the facts. When you look at Pillar 1 of the Plan to Protect Canadian Democracy, it is enhancing citizen preparedness is the pillar. So there's been a digital citizen initiative led by the Canadian Heritage, which supported skills development through the use of awareness sessions, workshops, and learning materials. So that's one thing that's been done in that pillar. Another is to get cyber safe, which is another public awareness campaign about internet security, which added content about cyber threats to Canadians' democratic process. So again, this is raising awareness among citizens across Canada, because what we've heard from CSIS in our testimony and others is that this is not just about intelligence or about that, like, everybody has a role to play in protecting our democracy. And part of it means raising the awareness of our citizens so that they understand what we're up against and really what to look out for, what the signs are of foreign election interference, so that they can help us identify and report and, in a way, gather intel and information that may be helpful in preventing it from happening. Prior to 2019, the government provided journalists with training on foreign interference and convened regular press briefings. So we also helped essentially inform and train journalists. Also, changes to Canada's election laws that expanded the CEO information and education programs aimed at the Canadian public. So, and I'll just flip to some of the legislative changes that were made. So one was an act respecting national security matters, Bill C-59. Bill C-59, it was a piece of legislation that our government brought forward, which provided both CSIS and CSE with the ability to engage in threat reduction measures subject to legal authorization, of course. So we heard this from the director of CSIS when he was before our committee, that they do intervene and have threat reduction measures that they're able to use. Obviously, when there's credible intel that's been analyzed and corroborated and evaluated, such that they're obviously not acting on a partial piece of intelligence, which, as the director said, was the case in most of the time they were accumulating intelligence that came with significant caveats, but that they, I think it's good for us to know that they had threat reduction measures and they used those where needed. What's interesting, though, is that our government was the one that gave them those powers in Bill C-59. So again, what's interesting is the Conservatives keep claiming that we've done nothing. Well, so CSIS has threat reduction measures that were given to them by legislation that was passed by our government. So that's a direct conflict with what the Conservatives keep asserting. Now, another one is Bill C-76, the Elections Modernization Act. So the Conservatives also claim that, again, over and over, the government hasn't done anything, as if they repeat this falsehood and people are going to believe it. Well, I don't believe that Canadians are going to be fooled by the assertion of false claims over and over and over again. The Elections Modernization Act came into force in June 2019, and it adds a number of different interesting and important measures. One is it prohibits foreign persons or entities from unduly influencing an elector to vote or refrain from voting, or to vote or refrain from voting for a particular candidate or registered party. It also prohibits third parties from using foreign funds for partisan advertising and activities. It also prohibits foreign entities from spending on partisan advertising and activities during both the pre-election and election period. It also requires online platforms to publish a registry of partisan advertising published during the pre-election period and all election advertising during the election period. It also has provisions that prohibit knowingly making or publishing a false statement to affect election results. So those are 5 additional measures that were added in the Elections Modernization Act. I was just getting started, Mr. Nader.
I know.
Mr. Nader, point of order.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just very briefly, on Bill C-76, Mr. Turnbull just mentioned the knowingly making a false statement. I would just like to point out for the record that I actually made an amendment to that effect, but it was declined by the committee, and the courts actually had to throw out that piece of legislation. And so it had to come back in what's called the John Nader Vindication Act, in which we fixed that piece of legislation after the fact. I just wanted that for the record.
So, Mr. Nader, I think you know very well that that's not a point of order. But just to demonstrate to all colleagues the leniency that I show when people want to put something on the record, and I've done that time and time again, and I think I've just offered that courtesy to you. So I just want it to be noted, because I think sometimes people don't recognize the courtesies I offer. I'm actually going to go back to Mr. Turnbull. Go ahead, Mr. Nader.
And on that matter, Madam Chair, we do appreciate that courtesy. And I would point out that one of our former colleagues on that side, Mr. Scott Sims, actually created what was called the Sims Protocol to allow just that type of, and I see Mr. Sims' former staffer back there, that type of intervention, which I think is a cordial and a collegial ability to allow a member to make an intervention without yielding the floor. So I do appreciate that opportunity to make that comment, Madam Chair.
I thank you, Mr. Nader. I'll take that in writing.
On that point of order, Madam Chair,
Mr.
on that point of order, Madam Chair, just before I have the floor back, I'd like to speak to that. So my understanding is that Sims protocol can only be evoked when the member that has the floor gives permission to have it evoked. So, and I did not give permission for that intervention, which was not a point of order.
So I feel like we're doing good. Our resources are going to be limited. So with that, let's keep doing what we've been doing. I'm going to remind us to take a breath, and I'm going to return the floor to you, Mr. Turnbull.
Kudos to Mr. Nader for getting that in. That I'm sure he won some points with somebody somewhere. Okay. Anyway, so back to what I was saying, which was that we have this 4-pillar plan, and that I've only spoken to one of the pillars so far, but there's 3 other pillars to speak to. And I was just speaking to 2 pieces of legislation that enhanced both CSIS and CSE's abilities to combat foreign election interference, but also how Bill C-76, the Elections Modernization Act, also enhanced our government's ability to tackle this very important issue. Within the other pillar, so the second pillar of the plan was improving organizational readiness. So government departments were briefed on how to identify threats, emerging tactics, and systems vulnerabilities to strengthen security practices and behaviors. So that's important. Again, that all-of-government approach means actually educating and training people across government departments, which was done. So those briefs in that training and you know, that capacity and awareness development was or did happen, and I'm sure continues. Also, political parties and election administrators were provided with technical advice. And this one I find particularly interesting. political party representatives were provided with classified briefings on threats. So this is interesting because Rosenberg, refers to this in his report, which is, which clearly demonstrates again a willingness and an ability to work on these issues across party lines and make sure that all parties have adequate information, that they're briefed, that they understand the threats, and that they can weigh in on those discussions. I'd also like to refer to the fact that in terms of organizational readiness, in 2018, our government established the Canadian Centre for Cybersecurity with a budget of $155 million over 5 years. CCCS is responsible for monitoring threats, protecting national critical infrastructure against cyber incidents, and coordinating the national response to any incidents related to cybersecurity. So that organization didn't exist prior to 2018 and was established by our government. Again, another example of a body, an entity that works across government and is, tasked with one piece of the overall ecosystem approach or whole of government approach. I think we can all agree that cybersecurity in the age of disinformation and data monopoly, referring back to the ethics report that was done in 2018, highlights how vulnerable the Canadian public is to disinformation. And the use of online platforms for the dissemination of that information certainly has a real impact and changes the threat environment for anyone looking at national security and the seriousness of foreign election interference. The other one is, the other pillar that I'd like to refer to is combating foreign interference. And our government established the Security and Intelligence Threats to Election Task Force. So this is the SITE Task Force, and it's the coordinating body which is comprised of the Communications Security Establishment, the CSE, the Canadian Security and Intelligence Service, CSIS, the RCMP, and the Rapid Response Mechanism housed in Global Affairs. So SITE builds awareness to threats to Canada's federal election processes and prepares government to assess and respond to those threats. Each agency brings its unique information and expertise to the table to support the panel by providing up-to-date intelligence and information. So, and SITE has, that SITE task force met regularly since 2019 and now meets on a monthly basis and met daily during the 2021 election. I think that's really important, that the security agencies that are tasked with monitoring and collecting intelligence and identifying threats to Canadian democracy were doing their work since 2019, met regularly, met on a monthly basis, and then during the elections, their meetings become daily. So the information that they're collecting is being relayed to government officials outside of the caretaker period, and then within the caretaker period feeds right into the panel. And so what's interesting to me is, again, I don't know how anyone can claim that our government hasn't taken foreign election interference seriously. And that's not to say, Madam Chair, that we shouldn't be constantly improving and evolving our systematic approach and comprehensive approach over time, which is what I think our national security advisors and experts have been saying to us, which is that we need to continue this work in a nonpartisan way, in a serious way, in a way that respects Canadian democracy, in a way that really tries to protect information that's that's highly sensitive and classified, and to make sure that we don't put both our reputation with Five Eye Partners, but also with other institutions, that we don't put our reputation at risk. I also want to speak to the fact that our government set up the rapid response mechanism with G7 countries at the 2018 G7 summit in Quebec. Its purpose is to strengthen the coordination across the G7 countries in identifying, preventing, and responding to threats to G7 democracies. So the rapid response mechanism supports the site task force in providing regular briefings to the panel of deputy ministers. So you can see how, if you actually drew a picture of the flow of information, that the rapid response mechanism basically shares information and coordinates efforts across the G7 countries, such that we should find out about foreign threats to Canadian democracy in advance. It's an early warning system, is my understanding, that feeds right into the site task force. That site task force then relays and briefs deputy ministers on the panel during an election. And so this works as a comprehensive set of mechanisms that can identify threats to Canadian democracy. I'd also like to say that within the plan that our government launched in 2019, which is the Plan to Protect Canadian Democracy, again, we acknowledged in that document the need to work with external partners. And that includes academia, industry, civil society to support information integrity in elections. And these partners are often have a unique role to play, I think is safe to say, but it's an important role. It's an important role because they provide a unique perspective on the evolving threat environment. They help educate the public, and they alert the public to attempts at interference both before and during the campaign. So I think it's important that within a whole of government approach, we also consider the fact that there are external partners that also provide a very important, or play a very important role in that comprehensive approach. The other pillar, the fourth pillar, is building a healthy information ecosystem. And so one of the things that's obviously important is the degree to which Canadians get information online today. And so our government launched the Canada Declaration on Election Integrity online in 2019, and it was updated again in 2021 prior to the election. So again, these are actions our government is taking. These are relevant to our work and our study, and are exactly the reason why I think if we actually look at the facts and information, and if members opposite are actually concerned about what's being done, then we have to acknowledge and affirm that there has been lots done. So the commitment by online platforms and the Government of Canada to safeguard elections from malicious interference and create a healthier online ecosystem was endorsed by Facebook, Google, LinkedIn, Microsoft, TikTok, Twitter, and YouTube. And again, that was updated before the 2021 election. I'm not claiming that that's the be-all and end-all of election integrity online. I think there's lots more work to be done, but I would say that right back to the 2018 report, where there was many recommendations made about how to protect Canadians from consuming information or disinformation online. It's great to know that our social media platforms were in agreement and endorsed that declaration, and that they were willing to do it again before the 2021 election. There's also something that was implemented called the Canadian Election Misinformation Project. This is on page 20 of Rosenberg's report. And they did an analysis of the role that social media platforms play in spreading false information. They found that notwithstanding more assertive moderation and election integrity policies, large social media platforms continued to be home to widespread misinformation. So I think this, is an area where we could do a lot deeper work as to, calling witnesses and looking at, well, within a writ period, but also outside of a writ period, how do we ensure that Canadians aren't consuming vast amounts of misinformation online? I mean, our online platforms are saying that they're committed to that, but the independent research is saying that, well, no, those online platforms, although they're committed to that, still are continue to be home to widespread misinformation. So I think there's a whole area here of our work that we need to take seriously that doesn't involve calling political staffers. It involves calling more witnesses that are relevant to this study. Some of the experts that have written these fantastic reports that I have here. I have one really good one on mis and disinformation during the 2021 Canadian federal election, March 2022, so it's relatively recent. It's from the Media Ecosystem Observatory, McGill, the University of Toronto, Max Bell School of Public Policy, the Monk School, all of them are collaborating around writing these really insightful reports that demonstrate, that we need to do more work in that area. So I think there's an opportunity there. So why are opposition parties not focusing on that? When these are clear indications coming from experts, clear work that needs to continue to happen in order to protect Canadians, and yet other members on the opposite side don't seem concerned at all with that. I mean, maybe that would be something that we could focus on in our work to come. So I think the thing that is really, not sitting well with me is the fact that we keep hearing these very false assertions made over and over and over again. And I think we have to be really honest with ourselves. We have to be honest and say, okay, if you really want to step outside of the partisan antics, get down to the truth, and take foreign election interference seriously, then let's stop playing games and trying to win political points by calling political staffers who don't have expertise in national security. Let's start listening to the experts that have come before this committee, and let's, instead of repeating the 3-4 times the same motion with slightly tweaked language so that we're here debating it over and over ad infinitum. I mean, I can do it forever. I'm happy to talk about this topic because I'm reading, consuming information, and I care about it. So I'm happy to continue talking about this if that's what opposition members really want. But I don't see why we would waste our precious time, and the public has elected us to do important work, and we want to protect Canadian democracy. It's clear from everything I've said so far that our government has a track record, and I could paint you a picture of it. It's so clear to me. I can lay it out in a diagram for any of the opposition members, and I just don't see why they would continue to deny the real facts and information that are clearly laid out in multiple reports. There's lots of information to substantiate what I'm saying. So I'm not making this up. I think the Conservatives have, a duty, if they're going to make false claims, to back them up with evidence, because they're not doing that, in my view. They're just spouting off things that they think will win them some political points or a little tick in the polls or something. So, I mean, look, I really believe that there is a need to continue to adapt our approach to foreign election interference. I think we've heard that loud and clear. So, if there's a silver lining in all of the partisan antics, it's to say, okay, well, let's do deeper, more meaningful work in this area. I think the Prime Minister has made that clear in his announcement and press conference, where he's given us some substantive actions that our government, some more substantive actions, I should say, that our government is now taking. But I think just before I get to that, I'd like to just point out a few other things. So, you know, I just kind of want to sum up. So an independent review was conducted after the 2019 general election, and changes were made. Removal of a reference to the specific election to make the protocol continue, you know, in perpetuity, hopefully. I think both the protocol, its panel, and that work is essential. I think we can all agree. Sure, it can be strengthened, but it should continue. So that change was made. Alignment of the protocol with the Caretaker Convention. That change was made. Explicit provision for the panel to consult with the CEO of Elections Canada as appropriate. That change was made after 2019. Provision for the ability of political parties to alert security agencies of incidents. So listen to that. The Conservatives keep saying that their concerns weren't taken seriously. Well, our government set up the panel and the protocol and then amended it based on James Judd's report, independent report done, and assessment done, to add a provision for the ability of political parties to alert security agencies of incidents. That was added by our government. They're not even listening, Madam Chair. The Conservatives have tuned out because they don't like what I'm saying. They don't like hearing facts and information that substantiate very real truths and claims about what our government has done on this issue. Recognition, another one is recognition of the panel's ability to examine domestically driven interference. That change was also made. The original protocol and panel focused exclusively on foreign election interference. So we also know that domestic interference is also important, and the panel was expanded to also include domestic-driven interference. Recognition of the panel's ability to receive information from other sources at its discretion was also added, and an independent review of the protocol no longer includes an assessment as to whether to establish the protocol on a permanent basis because, of course, our government made it permanent. Also, I want to mention Budget 2022. Again, this all goes to the claim, the false claim that we've heard over and over and over again by the Leader of the Opposition and the members of the Conservative Party who are making false claims every day they're out there in the House and saying...
Mr. Turnbull, I have a point of order.
Madam Chair, the Leader of the Opposition cannot sit here at the committee, so I don't really see why this is relevant. Thank you, Mr. Berthold.
Point of order, Madam Chair. Just while we're on points of order, very briefly, I see we're 2 minutes to 2.
I'm hoping Mr. Turnbull finishes.
Well, I would just say on that matter, I would hope that when 2 o'clock hits, we suspend until 3:30. I believe there's agreement that we would have resources from 3:30 to 5:30.
I know you've always wanted to be the chair, and I appreciate that. I've had a lot of feedback. I'm sitting here very patiently.
I'm just saying that would be the option that we would support.
There's many options. Excellent to
3:30.
hear. I thank you for your options. Mr. Turnbull.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So as I was saying, in Budget 2022, our government also added several new measures. One, resources and a renewed commitment to expand the rapid response mechanism was made. Number 2, ongoing cyber activities to protect against disinformation. So our ability was enhanced to look at that. Commitment to support research at public institutions on foreign election interference, and resources provided to the Privy Council Office to coordinate, develop, and implement government-wide measures designed to combat disinformation and protect Canadian democracy. So that's 4 more measures that were added in the last budget. So I don't know, again, how there's any factual accuracy to the points that the Conservative Party has been making over and over again. But I really, it frustrates me, to be honest, Madam Chair. Like, I'm just very frustrated by the fact that they seem to want to misinform people. I don't know why they would want to do that, why they would want to claim things that are false about our government over and over and over again, when they know that the truth is that we have a track record of developing all the systems and mechanisms and independent review processes and improving them and adding more measures as they make sense to continue to evolve our approach with the evolving threat environment, just as security professionals in this country have told us is necessary. Our government has done that. The former Minister of Democratic Reform, now the leader of the official opposition, didn't do anything, literally nothing. I would challenge the members of the official opposition to point something that their leader did when he was the Minister of Democratic Reform. Lastly, I want to talk about the Prime Minister's remarks quickly. I'll be very quick on this. I know it's. I know many of you, Madam Chair. Am I? I guess it's okay. I'll just go into. I think the significant actions that the Prime Minister laid out are actually, I think, very conducive to us continuing to evolve our comprehensive and whole-of-government approach to tackle foreign election interference. I think the first thing that I noted was in his remarks, he basically asked Minister LeBlanc to work on an implementation plan as quickly as possible. He also talked about the importance of what was set up in 2017, which I know MP O'Connell also spoke to, which is NSICOP, and just how that's an appropriate mechanism for reviewing highly classified and information related to national security. Madam Chair, do you want me to just continue till the meeting runs out? Because I'd like to start whenever we continue again, I'd like to have my name on the speakers list if I can continue speaking to this. But I know members probably want to adjourn to go to question period soon.
Thank you. I am suspending this meeting. Stay tuned. Thank you. Have a good day.